Hi everyone, this is Margaret Manning with 60 and Me. This is the place where women over 60 come to be inspired. My guest today is Dr. Margaret Rutherford. Dr. Margaret is a clinical psychologist. She works in Arkansas. She's had a practice for 20 years there, and she specializes in anxiety and depression. And she has a blog and is a writer on topics around relationships and midlife and depression. Welcome, Dr. Margaret. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm just delighted to be here.
It's a great name, by the way.
Oh, well, yes. I sort of like yours, too.
I love it. Well, I'm so glad you're here. We've got a group of maybe 150,000 women over 60, and we deal
Fantastic.
with, it's great. And we transition in our 60s to so many different roles, and things change, relationships shift. But one thing that happens a lot, I'd love your thoughts on this, is friendships. And when we start to reinvent ourselves in our 60s, we look around and realize we're surrounded by friends who are not lifting us up. You might even call them toxic friends. And I wondered if you could give us your thoughts on how you identify a toxic friend. Like, what kind of people should you be looking for? And how, then eventually we could talk about how to separate. But how do you identify a friend who's not positive in your life?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the question for me, and maybe you can answer it a little more clearly for me, is do you feel like these relationships get toxic as people age? I mean, or has the relationship that you're talking about been toxic for a long time and you're just getting tired of putting up with that? I mean, I think those are two different situations.
Okay, great question back. That's a perfect thing to clarify. I'm thinking about both of those things. So let's talk about first people who we were accidentally associated with in our past. So, for example, moms, if we made friendships with a mom because our children went to school together, or we made friends with people at work because we worked together. So people who we didn't necessarily choose as our best friends, but over time became woven into our lives. And so as we get older, our children are no longer at home. We don't go to the gym together or the kids' playground together. We don't go to work perhaps. And so we find ourselves noticing they always complain, or they always are negative, and we never noticed that when we had a reason to hang out
when
together.
you had a context.
I had a context. That's the right word. So let's talk about those first. And then the others you mentioned that, people have always been horrible and grumpy and mean, and you just never really liked them, but maybe it's a family member.
Yeah.
I mean, and we don't have to. Exactly. So let's do the first one though first about, contextual friends.
Sure. I've done a lot of theater, Margaret, and when you're in a theater production, the cast, if it's a good show and it's a close show, people say, "Oh, we just got to get together after the show," and you're so special to me, and you write all these accolades about them, and then the show ends and you never see them again.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. And then you sort of realize, now, wait a minute, they were pretty narcissistic, or I didn't like the way they ate their food, or whatever it was. But so context does build a structure for people who are very different to come together and to share some experiences. But when that is done, it's your differences are far greater than your similarities.
Yes, exactly.
So, not that is bad in and of itself, to have friends that aren't like you, or have a different faith, or have a different, they like to camp and you like to nap. So, that's okay. But when that underpinning is gone, it's very difficult for those relationships to continue. And then sometimes people push for them to continue. Yeah. So if someone
came to you and said, I want to break a relationship with that person. I really can't deal with it anymore. How would you tell them to, or advise them to have the conversation? Just not see them anymore, not answer the phone, or?
A general piece of advice for people who are predicting difficulty in a conversation is this: you have to decide if the other person is capable of having the conversation. do they have what we would call in my business the ego strength? Do they have the ability to take responsibility for what is theirs, to hear you without feeling criticized or judged, to be open to looking at things objectively? Do they have that capability?
Right.
If they don't have that capability, it's probably not a great idea to try to have the conversation.
Okay.
It will just lead to things going badly.
Yes, I understand.
So I think if you decide they are capable of having the conversation, if you could say something like, I was so glad you were in my life when my son and your son were so close, and I think you're a great person, and I recognize that we're in a different place now, and you may feel the same way about me, and I simply, how would you say it? Well, you kind of gauge their reaction after that, after those comments, and then say, I want to move into another way of relating with you that is maybe less frequent, or because if they are still valuable, you're valuable to me in this way, and I'd love to have that, but I would like to change some other things. Now, is that going to hurt their feelings? Maybe. If they have the ability to be objective, they can probably say, I get it. I've been pushy, or I don't have many friends, and that's not your problem. It's my problem, and I need to work on that. And thank you for being honest with me. Now, somebody who's defensive, but again, you might not even have the conversation with someone who's defensive.
Right.
Yeah. So, and if you don't have the conversation, you have to do some inner work about whether you feel guilty for withdrawing from the relationship, and that can be difficult work, especially if you take responsibility for everybody's feelings, like a lot of women do. Yeah. But relationships do end, and it's all right that they end. It hurts, but people are going to get through it, and it's normal that when the context ends, that you're not going to maintain friendship.
I'm hearing little voices in my head because we've had this conversation in the community before, and I will ask you about family, because a lot of times people will say, well, I can deal with a girlfriend that I like, who used to his son played with my son. There's a different context, and she probably gets it. That's easy. But what about if it's someone who doesn't have that ego strength that you spoke about, someone who is no good saying that highlighting their faults, or like you're negative all the time, or you criticize me without realizing it. There's no point in saying that, because like you say, if they're
correct.
So how would you deal with it? Would you just really not see each other and just make excuses?
Yes, you establish boundaries. You don't make excuses. You just say, when you act the way you act, I'm not going to be available. You just hand them back the responsibility, but you don't necessarily have a discussion about it. You just hand them back the responsibility. Now, is that hard?
Yeah.
Yes, especially with family members. Yeah. But it's setting that you will tolerate only so much, and you won't tolerate anymore. But if they try to pull you into discussion about it, you say, I wish I could talk to you about this, but I don't think that conversation will go well.
Now, that's really good. I mean, it's funny, as you were talking there, I remembered a show on TV, and I don't watch TV much anymore, so I have for no life of me what it was, but it was a woman who was dealing with her son, who was giving her a lot of anxiety. They just couldn't relate. And she drove him somewhere and then left him there. It was an adult child, and it wasn't like a million miles away. It was just another place. And she said, I don't have the emotional strength to deal with your behavior right now. And that's all she said, and I mean, of course it was a television show, so it wasn't reality, but it had a truth to it, which is sometimes you have to just say, I just don't have the capacity to deal with this. I just need to let it go.
What is rising to the top for me is that people like to think that love is unconditional, and maybe spiritual love is unconditional, but actually love is very conditional. And you can use someone's love up. You can use their caring up. and handing that responsibility back. I say, I would like to be able to still feel this way about you, but in the moment I don't anymore because of your actions or because of what you said. And then you leave it there with them, and they may get angry or even vengeful, but that's you saying, I'm not going to be available for you to just, throw me to the floor and then I have to mop myself up.
And I'm assuming that you would prefer this to be in person, not texting anymore.
Yes. I have couples who text when they argue, and one's on the first, one's on the second floor. Yeah, that's an interesting thing.
That's a no. But okay, so let's go back to the people that are always grumpy. I mean, we actually have a really funny situation where we've written an article about this. Whatever happened to boomers who become grumpy and just plain mean? And there seems to be a thing that happens when you get to be older. And I always say guys, but they just get really grumpy. Like that nothing pleases them. It's like when I was your age, I used to do this. How do you talk to those people? Do you just kind of just move on, or
to the grumpy people?
Yeah, to the grumpy boomers.
I love the grumpy people. The grumpy boomers.
Because there's something about being 60 sometimes for people that like you said earlier, there's a resentfulness or maybe there's a bitterness about something, and you just don't feel good about yourself. So that lens is how you see everybody. So how do you deal with
if there's somebody that you want in your world, and whether they're grumpy or not, I think you can use humor a lot. You can say, you can tease them about their grumpiness. But grumpiness is often, if someone's always grumpy, they're probably depressed. So we go back to they're not wanting to show you or admit to themselves that they have some mild to moderate depression going on, because grumpiness is about just seeing everything very negatively.
Yes. Yeah.
Unless that's a character trait, unless that's been around forever and you're just tired of it by the time you're 60. And that's when I think laughter and teasing can help. Kind teasing, not cruel teasing.
Yeah.
But especially men do not show depression like women do. Men tend to show it in agitation or anger. And then and also substance abuse. So, they'll try to express it that way, or they'll try to get rid of it, work through it that way. So, often if you can suggest to a man that maybe he should think about an antidepressant, or maybe he could consider trying to do, men, I actually think men have a harder time accepting aging than a lot of women do. And they, many men lose their ability to have an erection or sustain an erection. And that is the way that they have calmed themselves, many of them. And so talk about grumpy. They're going to be grumpy. And so suggesting Viagra or something like that, where they might never think about that, or again, it's sort of dependent on if you want to hang in there with them and go, you're getting to be a grumpy old man, and I don't like that, and this is what I'm hearing.
I guess there's a difference, and I think we've covered a lot about friendships and of all different sort of through different lenses, but I think that if you want to invest in a relationship, if it's for your husband, for example, or if it's your a very good friend, then you do want to dig deeper and understand what's really on your mind, what's troubling you, and do you want to talk about it, and that's one thing. But when people become challenging your self-respect, and like where you have to every day make a compromise to live with them or just to get together with them, then I think that getting rid of that toxic friendship you have to kind of be selfish when you get to be 60 when it comes to relationships that are negative, don't you think?
I wrote a review of an interesting book that came out, I want to say about a year and a half ago. It was called My Other Ex, and it talked about ending friendships. And the interesting part of the book was that some of the pieces were written by people who had dumped friends, and the other pieces were written by people who had been abandoned or dumped.
Yeah.
And it gave a fascinating perspective of
Yes.
the difference and the reasons why people do that, the reasons people withdraw, and the hurt, but the learning that can be involved when you're dumped. And so a way, and maybe this will be a helpful tip, when someone is acting in a way that's very disrespectful to you or hurtful to you, most people try to say, I wish you wouldn't do that, or I'm tired of you doing that, or they get angry back or whatever.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, instead of talking about the other person, if you talk about yourself, you have a chance of getting through. What that means is you would say, when I hear you call me whatever name, I just cringe on the inside.
Yes.
And I pray that you don't mean it, but I'm afraid you do. And it just, I want to withdraw from you. I want to leave the room. Do you realize you're having that impact on me? You talk about yourself.
Yes, how you feel.
Right. Now, people who are truly abusive or who have so detached from their feelings, they're not going to hear you. Yeah. So that's a whole nother decision in the making there.
Okay. So I think this has been very useful. And you know something? I would love to be able to point people to that article. If you could maybe after the call, you can send me the link to the book, or maybe did you write the article for a book?
I wrote the review.
Then the review might be great. We could include it in the article because you have a website. I should mention this. It's drmargaretrutherford.com, but it's just drmargaretrutherford.com. And I'll put it in the article so people can see it. But your blog is great. And I think that if people don't have someone like you to go and see, do you do any kind of consultancy on the phone? I mean, do you do private consultancy? Or do you have just private clients?
I get so much feedback about nonverbal behavior that I don't like doing phone therapy. I will do phone therapy or with people that I have been in practice with that I almost know what they're doing.
Yes.
Are they wringing their hands or are they shrugging their shoulders or sitting down or, are they looking out the window? I know them so well. I know what they're doing.
Yes,
but there are a lot of people who do that, but I just haven't jumped onto that boat yet.
Well, I'm glad we got a chance to get some of your gems and on video here. This is fantastic. And people can check out your website for other articles you've written on different topics related to all of this.
I will say that I have you can email me at askdrmargaret@drmargaretrutherford.com.
Okay.
And I will answer your question, but I will answer it very carefully. Only there's a certain amount I'll say, and then I'm not going to go further than that.
Okay. Another thing is we take this video that we're recording now and we put it into an article, and then the article is published on 60ME website, and people will always leave tons of comments. So when the article's released, I'll let you know, and then you can jump onto Facebook and just, make some comments and it'll be great. Anyway, wonderful to chat with you. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks.